Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Casey, and I'm the director of the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs here at Georgetown University. Welcome to the second installment of our Listening to Black Clergy series, an integral part of our ongoing anti-racism programming here at the Berkeley Center. Our first conversation was back in early July, which I have to confess at this point seems literally light years ago. You can find that video on our website event page. I have a few housekeeping items I want to run by you before we get to our actual panel. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be posted on the event page on our website soon. If you registered for today's event, you will also receive an email with the video when it becomes available shortly. In the last 15 to 20 minutes of our conversation today, we will answer questions from the audience, and we ask you to please submit those questions by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and please start typing those questions now as the panelists begin, and that way we have a chance of hearing more questions as we go along. Now let me introduce our remarkable and stellar veteran panel here listening to Black clergy. First, let me introduce the Reverend Leah Daughtry. She is a nationally recognized organizer, activist, political strategist, author, and faith leader. Leah is the executive minister of the House of the Lord Churches. She previously served as CEO of the 2008 and 2016 Democratic National Conventions, and she was chief of staff of the Democratic National Committee. She is also co-author of For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics in 2018. Welcome, Leah. It's great to see you as always. Next, we have, I think you're muted, but that's okay. Next, we have Cheryl Sanders, who is professor of Christian ethics at Howard University Divinity School and senior pastor of Third Street Church of God in Washington, D.C. Her several books include Empowerment Ethics for a Liberated People, Ministry at the Margins, and Saints in Exile, The Holiness Pentecostal Experience in African American Religion and Culture. Her current research is centered on past and present Black Christian public intellectual discourses. She is also president of the American Theological Society. Next, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Adam Taylor. He is the acting president of Sojourners and author of Mobilizing Hope, Faith-Inspired Activism for a Post-Civil Rights Generation in 2010. Taylor previously led the Faith Initiative at the World Bank Group and served as the vice president of advocacy at World Vision US and is the senior political director at Sojourners. Welcome, Adam. It's great to have you. And finally, the Reverend Travis Winkler. He serves as the senior pastor at Second Presbyterian Church in St. Louis, Missouri, a multiracial congregation affiliated with the Presbyterian Church USA, an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ and graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. Reverend Winkler's ministry resides at the intersection between congregational development and broad-based community organizing amid historically entrenched racial, political, cultural, and economic divides. I want to thank all of you for coming back. I promised you when we first met that we would have a second iteration, and I hope things go well enough that you're willing to come back a third time before too much time passes. Let's jump right into the questions. When we last met, we spent a lot of time talking about the murder of George Floyd, and unfortunately, sadly, the cascade of deaths of Black men and Black women by police continues. The shooting of Breonna Taylor is one of the more recent gripping episodes. So Cheryl, I want to start with you. What do you make of the unfolding story of Breonna Taylor's death?
Breonna Taylor's death has brought a lot of important attention to the ongoing problem of racial injustice and how to bring justice to policing. I think one of the most significant things that I have observed is how her name, just her name itself, has gotten circulated and publicized. Even the professional athletes inscribing her name on T-shirts and shoes. And it's very important, I think, to put a name and a face to these incidents. So when you say the word, the name Breonna Taylor, there's a whole narrative that comes up. And it's basically a story of essentially a Black woman sleeping in her bed and is shot to death by police officers. The other thing about the Breonna Taylor story that I think is potentially will help us to move forward in this conversation is the nuance that this is not simply a Black against white racial injustice issue. You have, let's just say, Blacks who participate in oppressive systems, and you also have whites who are allies of justice. And so in this story, we have, shall we say, a Black antagonist. And that, I think, is helping us to understand this, not just simply a metric of whites versus Blacks, but it's systems and networks and nuances. And so hopefully, as the Breonna Taylor case continues to unfold, we'll have an opportunity to educate and empower people to think in terms of the complexities of this problem. It's a complex problem. It's not a simplistic problem. But if we're going to achieve racial justice and if we're going to bring justice to our policing systems, we can't be naive about how these things sort of reduce to Black and white, more complicated than that.
Thank you, Cheryl. Travis, how about you? What do you see going on in this particular case?
Yes, I really appreciate those comments as well, Cheryl. And in terms of adding to the cultural narrative of this moment, I resonate with your observation around breaking down the kind of binary of Black, white in these moments of cultural outcry for justice. I also think this is important to include a gender component as well. We've seen so many instances of violence against adult Black males or Black boys, for instance. But this is a moment where that narrative can also be shaped by violence against a Black female, and a female who was at a really important turning point in her life, had so much going for her and had such a future for her. And I think that just adds to our continued broadening of our sense of what Black life matters means culturally, to include that gender piece as well. So I just want to echo that today.
Leah, let me turn to you. What do you see going on in the Breonna Taylor episode?
It is for me a continuation of what has been the narrative for, count the years. Breonna Taylor, who died and who was killed in 2020, is not the first Black woman to be killed in her home. My mind goes back to Eleanor Bumpurs, who was in her home in 1984 in New York City and was killed in the course of an eviction. And so this is about the safety of Black bodies and how we feel and experience our life in this country. Someone called me and said, there's a new poll that's coming out that's going to say Black women don't feel safe. And I said, well, when did we ever feel safe? When was the point where we felt safe? I think this is rising. The Breonna Taylor case has helped the nation's attention to be drawn to this issue of safety in a way that perhaps it was not before. And I want to piggyback on what Travis said earlier. What is always instructive to me is the way that these narratives get woven. And so when a Black person is killed or harassed or whatever, the way that the media talks about it is first they have to tell you all the credentials of that Black person as if to demonstrate that they were one of the good ones. And so therefore were not deserving of the treatment that they got. When Christian Taylor was bird watching, we had to hear about how he was the president of the Birding Society, the Audubon Society, how he went to whatever Ivy League school he went to before we could get to the fact that he was just in the park watching the birds. And so until we can just say a Black man was killed, a Black woman was killed, whatever they were doing, whatever their pedigree, whatever their schooling was, whatever the activity was that they were engaged in, and it doesn't need a qualifier, then until that happens, we're not going to be able to have a real conversation about this, because it means that we are placing value on their activity, their personhood, their education, that somehow should have exempted them because they were one of the good ones. And that piece of it is annoying to me, and I think really shows where we are still in our own heads as we talk about these issues.
Oh, thank you. That's absolutely true. And you also see the converse too. I remember when Botham Jean was shot in his apartment by a white woman police officer, and it leaked out later on that they allegedly found an ounce of marijuana in his apartment. So you get the disqualification as well as part of these narratives, which diminishes his humanity or the humanity of the victim. So, I mean, that point is very well taken. Thank you. Adam, how about you? What do you see going on here?
Well, first, I really appreciate all the comments from my colleagues. I would just add a couple things. One, Breonna Taylor's tragic death, killing, strikes particularly close to home to me, because my Black mother grew up in segregated Louisville, Kentucky. I haven't spent a lot of time in Louisville, but it is a place that's connected deeply in my history. I think one of the things that was just so jarring about this tragedy is that the grand jury did not even say Breonna Taylor's name. This is a case that just shows you that equal justice under the law is still a mirage in America. It is still a denied reality in America for Black men and women. And to be honest, for many brown men and women in this country. And so the kind of miscarriage of justice and lack of police accountability that we see all throughout this case, from the beginning, a kind of faulty no-knock warrant that we still need to get to the bottom of, all the way through the end of her tragic killing, just highlights how broken our criminal justice system is, and the need for not just incremental or cosmetic reforms, but a pretty radical transformation. And I think that's what the calls from the streets are, from the Black Lives Matter movement and beyond. And so, you know, I do see hope in this, though, that as a result of the outcry and the protests, the city of Louisville did put in place a ban on no-knock warrants and some other reforms, and those are good. But we know those are just a start, and we have to go so much further than that. And so that ties into some of the conversation we'll have later about the importance of the election, because elections do have dramatic consequences. But it shows you that the protests have made a difference, but they need to be sustained, and they need to translate into the voting booth, and they need to go deeper than reform and into true transformation of our criminal justice system and of policing itself.
And I think it's also worth noting that this heroic grand jury member who's asked for the transcript released and asked for the Attorney General to allow them to speak, I mean, that was mind-blowing to me. That clearly this citizen, whoever she was, really took great personal risk and stood up to that system as she experienced it, to say, this is unfair. Our behavior has been misportrayed here by the Attorney General. Now, we'll see how all that plays out, but I think there was an individual, and I don't know her story. I don't think her name has been released, but it really was quite remarkable how she stood up and said, no, we've got to get deeper into the behavior here of the system. Well, let's move on. So I think, as everybody here knows, tonight is an extraordinary moment in terms of the vice presidential debate, and we'll get to that in a second. But I'm curious, really, when Kamala Harris was named to the ticket, my Facebook and my Twitter lit up with jubilation from all quarters. So I'm just curious, Leah, I think you in fact said something really quite amazing that day. What is the significance of her selection on the Democratic ticket?
Well, I think it's an acknowledgement that how far the party has come in its trajectory around race and gender. This is the same party that Bull Connor was a member of, and that used dogs and fire hoses, that refused to seat Fannie Lou Hamer at conventions. And so not so many years hence, we now have an African American, an Indian American woman as the vice presidential nominee. When Walter Mondale was choosing his running mate, he didn't consider any Black women. But we had a presidential candidate who had a plethora of women to pick from, not that Mondale didn't, but who chose to take that seriously and plant a stake in the ground and really choose to create an historic moment. So what we have now, I think, for African-American women who have been overwhelmingly loyal to the Democratic Party, it is an acknowledgement. It is gratifying. I don't think that's the reason he chose her. Obviously, she's qualified. Obviously, she was running for president herself, so she's got her own set of credentials. So her qualifications are not at issue. But to have a Black woman who reflects the demographic of the Democratic Party, you cannot win the Democratic nomination without African American women who have been loyal, is really a nod, an acknowledgement of both our political importance and how we turn out to vote, but what is needed in order to help the Vice President Biden win. And I think that's part of the statement he was making. Is certainly what we shared with him when we met with him about why he should choose an African American woman when we pulled out the Electoral College map and said, here is how an African American woman will help you win the Electoral College. So that's why it's so exciting. It's historic, and it's going to be quite the evening, I think.
I have no doubt you're right. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Adam, what's the significance of her appointment to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Leah said it really well. And if I remember correctly, I think that Leah is her sorority sister. Maybe that's why she's wearing her pink tonight. I'm a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, so I feel a strong connection to Senator Harris as well. I mean, it is historic to have a Black woman, Black African American and Indian woman be the nominee for vice president is unprecedented, and it's extremely important in this moment. I think this was the right choice, but I also think that there was a lot of pressure upon the Biden campaign to make this choice. I'm hopeful that they would have made the choice without the pressure. But in this particular moment where we have gone through what many have referred to as a awakening, reckoning moment around racial injustice, I think it was essential that the Democratic Party kind of made this choice. And again, it was the right choice for all the reasons you just heard. So I am, hopeful, also excited to listen to this debate. And, I think regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, you can feel a sense of pride that our country has gotten to a point where we have these kind of opportunities and selections being made. So I hope that, many people that may be of a different political persuasion can feel that.
I think that's a really good point. Cheryl, how about you? What does this selection of Senator Harris mean to you?
Well, in addition to what's already been said, there's a dimension of her candidacy for vice president that might go unnoticed. We'll see if it comes up in the debate tonight. And that is the longstanding kind of concern that Democrats missed the boat on religion and the importance of religion, and that the Republicans have taken religion to the hilt, if not as a wedge issue, as a identity issue. Well, Kamala Harris in her childhood was part of Church of God, which is my denomination, Church of God Anderson. She attended with a friend or a family member, because I don't know that her parents were Christian or went to church, but she as a child grew up in one of our congregations in Oakland. I think she now belongs to a Baptist church. So as a woman of faith, I think that notwithstanding the way faith played out in the Obama nomination and his presidency, where so much of the hostility toward him was based on this allegation that he was a Muslim, and it was almost like nothing he could say or do could convince a part of the electorate that he was even a Christian. I think in her case, I would like to see her at least give an honest and ethical representation of what it means to be a person of faith who is engaging in these political conversations and issues, not just strictly from a posture of faith, but bringing some integrity to that. Well, when I say integrity, I think we all know what it looks like when it's just, as I say, a way of playing to the crowd. But I'm excited about her faith also, as it's analogous to this connectivity that she has with the sorority, the HBCU. I mean, she's a person who's got significant networks of relationship to constituencies of voters, yes, but also organizations, movements, entities where there's some values that are at stake. And we are in a values crisis right now when it comes to leadership. I expect her to rise to the occasion.
Thank you, Cheryl. Several of your colleagues that I know at Howard were really, again, just jubilating after her pick all over social media. And our mutual friend Paul Montero, who works at Howard, was leading that charge. And so that, I mean, that's a huge point, I think, her connectivity to all these networks. Travis, how about you? From your perspective, what's the significance of her landing on the ticket?
Well, I echo everyone's reflections and comments. I think one thing I would add is I'm eager to find someone who can prosecute a case publicly around these values that we've been highlighting. And that, I think, is so broad and wide, and it's painful as moral leaders and religious leaders to live with this continued trauma and these continued chasms of where we are, where our communities are, and where our public leadership is. And to see someone, for all the reasons that have already been given, and also with the rhetorical skill to really prosecute and aggressively make the case in light of these values for a different direction in leadership, that'll be a cathartic moment for me to see that publicly displayed right now.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think you set up the last question here very well, and that is that obviously tonight's debate comes at an extraordinarily crucial moment in the presidential race. I mean, it's impossible to underestimate the stakes in this conversation. So Adam, what are you hoping to see in the course of this debate?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I'll just make a plug, hopefully not a shameless one, for a series that we are writing as a part of our digital publication. So if you aren't a part of Sojo.net, please sign up and check it out. But we are making the case that the primary, not the only, but the primary religious issue in this election is race and racism, for a lot of the reasons that we just discussed, and for more, because it is not really an issue. It is a cross-cutting reality and challenge that our country has to confront and has to address. It impacts everything from poverty and economic justice to environmental issues through environmental racism. So first, I think it's really important that that is front and center. The other thing that I would emphasize, which I just mentioned, is the COVID pandemic that our country is still grappling with and is struggling through. I think it is absolutely unconscionable that recent remarks by the president after he contracted COVID were essentially an insult to the 211,000 people who have lost their lives and the families that are grieving their loss. To first compare it to the flu, which we know is a terrible, irresponsible comparison. And then to say that he has somehow dominated this disease compared to others, again, it's just, to me, shows that this illness did not lead to the kind of humility that oftentimes illness can in people that get sick. And so I think the handling of the COVID crisis is front and center on people's minds. And I do hope that there's a robust debate that is based on what we've actually gone through as a country and the kind of leadership decisions that have been made. And so I hope that's front and center. I also think that, interestingly enough, immigration has not been as prominent an issue as many as expected. Certainly that was one of the leading wedge issues in the 2016 election that brought Trump to power. And I think it's probably going to come up tonight, but I think it's important that that set of issues gets addressed. I mean, we have 11 million undocumented immigrants that are living in the shadows that really deserve a chance to earn citizenship. We have the documented young people that show so much promise and still don't have a permanent solution for their own citizenship, which they also should deserve, or do deserve. So immigration's one. I mentioned climate change. That is very much in our news, with horrific wildfires in the West Coast to hurricanes that are hitting and about to hit the Gulf Coast. And so the kind of leadership that's necessary to not only take that crisis as real, but provide bold leadership to address it is also crucial. So there's a lot of things I can name. The last thing I'll just mention is that at the end of the day, this election, I think, is primarily not just about race, but about what kind of country we want to become and who is actually included in the we the people. Do we really believe in equal justice in the law extends to everyone, regardless of your skin color? Do we really believe in an America where neither punishment or privilege is tied to skin color, to gender, to sexual orientation, and more? And so this kind of battle over the country we want to be is very much at the heart of it. And the politics we want to embrace, is it a politics of fear and hatred and division, or is it of one of hope and of trying to bring the country together and to pursue the common good? So those are the things I'll be looking out for, and I hope that the candidates can really get into both those issues, but also the things that are underneath those issues.
Thanks, Adam. That's a great list. Cheryl, how about you? You talked about Senator Harris's religious background and connectivity to networks, but what else are you looking for tonight in the deeper debate?
I hope that in the debate tonight, there'll be a different conversation than we heard last week about race and its implications for, quote, law and order. She should be able to bring not just the stance of a prosecutor, but insight into how we can make our policing more just, our criminal justice system more just, even the topic of mass incarceration. These are some of the concerns that in a civil political debate, as a listener, you should expect to get to hear, well, what is this person's experience? What's their view? What's their platform? What's the hope that they bring to these important conversations? So I'm especially going to be listening for what insights she brings into the pursuit of justice as a public policy agenda.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Travis, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I really agree with that as well, Cheryl. I think part of what I'm going to keep my eye on is the comportment of oneself and the contrast between these two tonight, and to see both the rhetorical skill on display, but also a kind of vision around a love of democracy and a love of democratic institutions, and a resetting of the tone of our way of being engaged in public discourse. You know, all the issues that Adam mentioned earlier are clearly on the top of my list as well. And yet I think the way that we've been so corroded in our public discourse over the past 4 years has really crippled us to have constructive policy conversation around these issues. And we need leadership that is modeling a way of engaging in these very important policy discussions, and the kind of revolutionary change that we need to address big challenges.
Thanks, Travis. How about you, Leah? There's a robust list on the table, but what else are you looking for?
Yeah, to what has already been offered, I would add a couple things. One, I want to see what Pence is going to do.
Thank you.
This debate is important because both of them are standing in for candidates who are past 70 years old. And so it is possible that either one of them could be the president of the United States. So while I'm excited to hear Kamala, I also want to hear Pence. I want to see the gymnastics that he's going to perform tonight to help us understand this president and the policies that their administration has pursued over these last 4 years. He's not off the hook here on the things that the children in the cages and the pandemic response, all of that. It's part of his portfolio too. So how is he explaining and sharing with us what the go forward is? And I think the pandemic is, for me, the overarching thing, because what it has, besides the obvious, with more than 200 of our fellow citizens who've lost their lives, it really has exposed the fragility of the American economy and the American safety net, because every area of the country is affected, whether you're talking about people not having jobs, whether you're talking about the healthcare disparities, whether you're talking about children in school who cannot connect because there's no connectivity in the places that they live. The pandemic has exposed all of it. And I heard, just as I was getting on, a restaurant owner saying, don't close my business because how am I going to eat? Well, if there's nobody who has a job who can afford to eat, you can be open, but you won't have customers. If people don't feel safe because of their health concerns, then it doesn't matter that your business is open because they're not going, particularly as the winter comes and you can't sit on the deck anymore. So how do both of these candidates walk us through a recovery, an economic and educational, healthcare recovery for the American society that really cannot begin until we address the issues of the pandemic?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I guess one question in my mind is the vice president capable of engaging Senator Harris and give her the dignity she respects as another human being and another political figure, not to interrupt, but to hear her out and just treat her with basic civility, which was in precious short supply during the presidential race. So, all right, well, those are all great answers. Let's pivot now. We've got a number coming from the audience, so let's take 10, 15 minutes here and see what we can do. Here's one from my esteemed colleague, Catherine Marshall, here at the Berkeley Center at Georgetown. And she says, what steps would you like to see announced and enacted on January 21st? Now, Catherine, I'm assuming you mean if there's a Biden administration, or maybe people can go either way on this, but I think that's a fabulous question. Who wants to take that? That's not directed to anybody specifically, so feel free.
But one step I'd like to see is fire all the people who are in positions, forget about being bipartisan from day one, and start all over again, clean slate of leadership.
Adam, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, no, and it's good to see Catherine out there somewhere. I think it's going to be, particularly if it is a Biden-Harris administration, really, really critical watershed moment to put in place serious election and electoral reform. I think this election has exposed the deep flaws, long existing weaknesses and injustices within our electoral system, or our voting system. And I think voters are a lot more educated than they were probably a year ago about some of those challenges. So I think there could be a significant uptick in political will to try to push through some serious reforms. It also depends on who's controlling the Senate and some other factors. But I would not want to see that opportunity squandered, because that won't necessarily come up again for quite some time. I also think there's going to be a huge opportunity around immigration reform, as I said before, or to put in place a really just comprehensive change for our immigration system, which we all can agree is broken. And I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for much deeper and more bold reforms in terms of policing. The fact that we couldn't get a bill through, or bill basically got stuck in Congress, despite the pretty significant shift in public opinion and the amount of awareness that is now around policing, is a real tragedy. But I do think that moment will still be with us even in January. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is kind of a tipping my hat to Catherine, it's so easy in this election to be myopic and focus only on the United States. foreign policy issues, international development, human rights really have not factored much in this election, probably because we still are at the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. But last week, there was a horrific, staggering milestone of 1 million deaths globally to COVID. And there is no real path for the United States to recover unless we address COVID domestically. And there's no way to truly arrest COVID globally unless we provide more leadership in order to address the pandemic globally. And so I really do hope that a new administration leans into that commitment, that it's not just in terms of funding, but it's also in terms of leadership and vaccine development and distribution and more. So this kind of resumption of US leadership around human rights and democracy and development is going to be a huge opportunity, and one that I will certainly be pushing a new administration to embrace.
Leah or Travis, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, one thing that comes to my mind is I'm not exactly sure what this looks like, but it seems like we have before us a need to codify norms that we used to just kind of believe public officials would inhabit. But steps to codify norms around what it means to be a responsible public official. I think there is a need to move toward establishing some more guardrails around what a responsible executive looks like, and ensure that as best we can, we don't fall into this kind of blurry space of irresponsibility and unaccountability again.
I would add to the excellent suggestions that my colleagues have offered. I would like to see them in the first 100 days take a look at the judicial appointments, because Mitch McConnell has been singularly focused on filling vacancies, and I think to date he's confirmed about 200 federal judges. So I would want to see a new administration look at what's still open, what can be filled quickly, how they can nominate and start to level the playing field. It's become very political, and we've got to level that playing field, because that has long-term implications in terms of criminal justice reform, in terms of election justice, how the courts are administered, how the elections are administered, and all of these cases that are going to be rising. And given now the conservative bent of the court, which we shouldn't even be talking about. We shouldn't be talking about a liberal court or a conservative court. It should be very even-handed, and we don't have that now. And I think that's one of the early things that a new administration can look at to help to level the playing field, in addition to the climate accords and what our standing is in the world, and how we regain our authority to support nations who are struggling and to address some of the global issues from which we have withdrawn over these last 4 years.
I have a friend who said if there's a President Biden, he could spend his entire first work week doing nothing but signing executive orders, joining the Paris Accord, as you said, realigning with the World Health Organization. The current administration set the new refugee cap at 15,000, and Vice President Biden said he'll raise that to 125,000. He could do that with a stroke of a pen. And I think the ethics for political appointees were going to be re-engraved in granite, just out of the chute. So those are all great things. Let me move on to another question here. This is from our friend Carolyn Sharp. She says it's vital that political theologians revise the pernicious white supremacist language of American identity, helping folks envision emancipatory community grounded in care for the sojourner, the stranger, and those at risk. Are any of you resourcing the Biden-Harris campaign so that they can do this effectively in their campaigning? And feel free to take a pass or share other information you've heard from other people if you don't want to personally identify yourself. But yeah, what have you or your organization suggested along these lines of addressing the language of white supremacy?
Well, to a little bit of language around this, I think that word emancipatory is so important, especially for where I'm serving in Missouri, and we have a lot that's on the docket, for us this electoral cycle. And I think there can be a mindset that can creep in that's more dominated by how do we invoke fear and control, kind of scarcity mentality around policy, rather than how will this policy shape a future of freedom for everyone and have an inclusive vision around that. Something that's pertinent for us locally, and I think having that in a part of what a Biden-Harris, approach to engaging people of faith and also people across the board, I think would be an inspiring move to make. So just a few cuff remarks there.
Sure.
I'll just borrow from some of the words of Dr. Eddie Glaude, who wrote a recent book, Begin Again, which I highly recommend others read. But he describes how the umbilical cord of white supremacy and racism literally disfigures American democracy and suffocates American potential. And that's my little bit of paraphrase of a number of things he said. But I think he's really onto something very, very important, which kind of ties into a little bit of what I was trying to share in terms of racism being a primary issue in this election. That it isn't just about the election for president. It's about how issues of race and racism, which then impact our criminal justice system and policing and poverty and environmental justice and so many other issues, have to be considered up and down the ballot, from mayor to city council member to district attorney to attorney general. Like, all of these roles are crucial. And from a Christian point of view, a Christian ethical point of view, anyone, including the president, but anyone, any candidate that refuses to condemn white supremacy and reject that as a part of who America is, that should be a deal breaker for a Christian voter. And as Sojourners, we have long resisted single issue voting. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a basic standard of human decency, of seeing the image of God in everyone, of believing in the American creed. And so if we can't even agree to that as a basic standard, then I think we're in pretty deep trouble. So I would argue strongly that that is really a lens by which we need to be evaluating candidates, and we need to put this kind of stoking and appealing to the worst side of America in the dustbin.
Sean, I would also say to those who are listening, Donald Trump did not come out of nowhere. He didn't spring whole out of Zeus's head, Athena's head, whoever's head. He is the child of a system that birthed him. So racism in the church, the same thing. It is born out of this ethos that has existed in America since its founding. So there is a lot of work. What Donald Trump has done is unleashed it and made it palatable for people who have those tendencies to now speak them in an open and bold and blatant way. But I want us, if there is a Biden administration, to not assume this gets fixed when Biden is elected president. It's gonna take some time to put these people back in a hole, back where they came from, and to undo what Donald Trump has unleashed. And that's going to take time. And that's going to take a lot of modeling. And I think that's the biggest thing that the Biden-Harris administration can do, is model for us a different way, and to be vocal about what America ought to be, what our values ought to be. But we all have to realize it's gonna take a minute to put this genie back in the bottle. And Donald Trump is a child of his experiences. He's a child of the racist tendencies of our country, as is the white church in many respects. And so they didn't come out of nowhere, and it's going to take some time to put them back where they were, and then to undo their thinking is going to take some effort, energy, and intention on our part, understanding there is always going to be a remnant in that part of the church and in that part of America that's going to hold on to their racism, their sexism, their misogyny, all of their phobias. They're going to be with us because we have not done the work as a country to uproot it and to kill it.
But I just want to add I agree with all of that, but I think that a parallel question to what kind of nation do we want to become? Is what kind of church do we want to become? Because Donald Trump would never be president if he didn't have the support. Everybody knows the figures of 81% of white evangelical voters voted for him. So what it's saying is he's just kind of, that's just an indicator of like taking the temperature of how racist American Christians are. That, and you don't have to make it, well, you know, it's not just a political issue. I think what has happened is we have allowed the politics to dominate our sense of religious identity. And so if you're a liberal or conservative, there was a time when that was you could talk about liberal and conservative theological terms. And not that is past, but that terminology gets dictated and dominated by politics, and then the religion just sort of fits into it. So I think that it's a theological problem, it's an ethical problem. It is not going to be a responsibility of our political leaders to address it, but if we don't address it, we will continue to be at risk to get leaders who are not worthy of the authority that we ascribe to them by our vote.
Can I just add one quick word on that? I really agree with that point, Dr. Sanders. Faith in Action has a shirt they created that says, "Disciple people out of racism." And I think that this is really a crisis of discipleship. When we're talking about the church, that we have not discipled people theologically and relationally in a way that can change and transform many of these long-standing and entrenched attitudes, biases, and prejudices. And so I do think it's a real test of the church. And the witness of the church is very much in jeopardy based on what happens in this election, how the church responds in the next month and beyond. We're likely to see a very contested election. So I think the witness of the church is going to be tested in that kind of moment as well. And so I'm prayerful that the church's reputation can be rehabilitated in a sense as a result of how we lead going forward, and that we really lean into this as a discipleship priority.
And let me simply add too, speaking as a white theologian and white clergy person in the past, it's really a marked failure of white clergy, white lay leaders, and white theologians. And it's going to call for repentance, and it's going to call for transformation so that they can then help be part of leading this intentional discipleship that you're talking about. And man, you know, the White House is not going to start that. They're not going to light that fuse. It really is on white Christian leaders and other white religious leaders to take ownership for the damage and neglect and the omissions and find a way to flip. And again, that switch is not going to flip overnight. That's a generational kind of thing. All right, let me ask one more question here. We've got many, and then we will pivot to your sort of final statements. Cheryl, you're getting a lot of fan mail here from Howard University divinity students, which is no surprise. But here's a great question from Charlene Press, an MDiv student at your school. And she writes, how should Black people and other minorities respond to the retaliatory threats from white supremacist groups? Should they receive a go-ahead signal from, I assume, other political leaders?
Great question. Great question. I have been asked this question in recent days, and maybe I was too quick with this response, but I'll share it. I'm not going to be threatened or intimidated by the violence of white supremacists. I mean, that's nothing new. And, you know, this stand by, stand down, all this kind of thing. We just can't be guided by fear or intimidation. Intimidation is what has set us in this present moment in the first place. Donald Trump never would have been elected president if he weren't a master of intimidation. And so I refuse to be intimidated. Now, if that means then that we have to take to the streets in nonviolent protests and stare down people who are going to try to march down Pennsylvania Avenue with their guns, then so be it. But I just believe that this is where our religion is either real or it's just rhetorical. And my faith says that I'm not going to be intimidated by the forces of evil, but it also means that my enemy is my neighbor. And I have to figure out a way to love my neighbor, even if my neighbor is carrying a gun and wearing all kinds of symbols and waving a Confederate flag. Now, love might not be kisses, but there has to be engagement. It's not a writing each other off, but finding the rigor of engagement, but also an empathy so that I can put myself in my neighbor's shoes. And if that doesn't work, I'm not going to be intimidated.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take up that question?
Yeah, I'll just add one very practical and concrete way that religious leaders, particularly Black clergy, but with other white allies and Latino allies and others are doing. So I mentioned this the last time, but I'll just say it again because the strategy's evolved a little bit, particularly because the politics keep evolving. But we as Sojourners have partnered with the National African American Clergy Network and have been doing voter protection work in 9 states. So a lot of that was about mobilizing and equipping clergy to hold election officials accountable for a free, fair, and safe election. And then we are training clergy to show up at polling sites, particularly vulnerable ones all around the country, but particularly in these 9 key states, where they would provide a moral presence. Now, as a result of the escalating rhetoric and what the president said in the debate, we are adding into that de-escalation training. So in addition to troubleshooting problems that arise in the election or at polling sites, overly long lines, broken voting machines, people being dissuaded from voting or intimidated, now we could face real threats of violence. And so we're training clergy to be chaplains at polling sites so that they, alongside lawyers, can play this dual role of moral presence and legal counsel. And invite anyone that is listening, particularly for clergy, if you want to learn more about it, you can go to lawyersandcallers.org, and we'd love to find a way to get you engaged.
Great. Leah, Travis, okay. Well, let's, we have 8 minutes left, and I have rashly promised at least one of our panelists we're going to quit on time. And I haven't lied to her yet, so I hope tonight doesn't become the first time. So let's pivot to just maybe 1 minute last remarks, last observations. So Travis, why don't we start with you?
I'm moved by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's comments regarding praying with his feet as an act of faithful public witness when he was marching with Dr. King in the civil rights movement. And a lot of the preaching and teaching I'm doing with our congregation here in St. Louis and as a public witness in this area is to really advocate for praying with our vote, praying through our vote, and seeing this moment as an opportunity to stand publicly and to see our engagement with this voting process, not just as something we do as citizens, but also something that we do in terms of our moral conscience and our commitment to ensure that our faith is being represented in the values that we are seeking to lift up this cycle. So I think for those who are interested in opportunities to wed congregational life, spiritual formation with civic engagement, democratic participation, this opportunity to pray and vote and to see voting as an act of prayerful public witness, something that we're focused a lot on right now. And hopefully will lead to a kind of shifting of our public discourse and all of the policies that need to shift as well in light of all the issues we've discussed.
Thank you, Travis. Leah?
Yeah, I think that this is an opportunity for us in this election season to reclaim the moral authority and the moral witness of the church and of church men and women broadly. And I think at this time that looks like, how do we educate and mobilize people to vote? And I'm a founder of Black Church PAC, where we are training clergy leaders to register people to vote, to get them out to vote, to be present on election day. And you're welcome to be part of that effort. You can just go to blackchurchpac.org, PAC, blackchurchpac.org, and be part of that. But also to stand as witness, and as Dr. Cheryl said, to not be intimidated, but to challenge in love all of our brothers and sisters who choose to take another path. And sometimes that love looks like calling you out. Sometimes love looks like telling you the truth. Sometimes love looks like making you come up higher to a different standard of witness. But also, lastly, I think this is an opportunity for us to, quite frankly, given the times, demonstrate courage. The kind of courage that we saw in our Messiah, that is willing to walk into a situation, knowing that it's dangerous, knowing that it's a challenge, but to understand that that is our calling. We're not called to be inside the comfortable four walls of our institutions, and the pandemic has pushed us outside of that. But to know that there is trouble, and to know that there is danger, and to run to it, not from it, and yet be between the people that we shepherd and the immediate danger. And so it calls to mind the quote about Harriet Tubman that she would say all the time: when you hear the dogs barking, keep going. If you see the torches, keep going. When you see the whites in their eyes, keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going.
Thank you, Leah. Adam?
Yeah, well, thanks again for pulling this together, Sean, and grateful to be with all the other panelists. I think it's really imperative that not just in this election moment, but also beyond it, we find a way, particularly as a church, to push ourselves to ensure that increasingly our faith shapes and even determines our politics, and not the other way around. I think we have way too much, our politics and even our kind of political identities are really shaping and determining our faith. And so one of the reasons I say that is because, I really, take to heart the words of Dr. King, who said, the church at its best is called not to be the master or the servant of the state, but be the conscience of the state. And even in a scenario of a Harris-Biden administration, the church will need to be that conscience, to push and to cajole and to transform policies and to create political will. And so I think that is going to be essential. And certainly, I think my colleagues would agree with that. And then, the late John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, said that the right to vote is sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democracy. And so I just implore all of you to not only vote yourselves in this election, but to influence everyone in your extended circle, your family, your colleagues, your friends, to make sure that they also exercise their right to vote. Because elections have consequences, we know that. But in this case, I really think that our very democracy is on the ballot, as is racism, and in many ways, as is our faith. And so you've heard a lot of ways in which you can engage in voter protection efforts. Those are essential, but we've got to do everything we can to ensure that people actually vote.
Thank you, Adam. And Cheryl, bring us home.
Well, I could summarize all of what I have to say in one word: vote. And having said that, I do think that there's necessarily a call to engagement beyond electoral politics. Right now, we're focused on getting the vote out and the crisis of the mail-in ballots and contesting the results. But once we elect our next president, it doesn't end there. But I believe that we're on the cusp of a new era of prophetic engagement as citizens. And I don't want this harvest to pass, because I really believe that we have the opportunity. It's in our face. It's coming from the streets into the churches. We have to stop our ears not to hear it. We have to blind ourselves not to see it. And so this is the moment that we can really bring about transformation, but it's going to require engagement. I am sorry for the pandemic, but I'm glad that the pandemic is enabling us to have conversations just like this. And as we continue virtually or in person to engage these issues, let us move into an era of prophetic engagement as citizens to make this nation just and make this nation reflect light of freedom on each and every participant.
So Reverend Travis Winkler, Bishop Leah Daughtry, Reverend Adam Taylor, Reverend Dr. Cheryl Sanders, thank you. Brilliant as always. I will come knocking on your inboxes at an appropriate date in the future. To all of our viewers, thank you. Stay safe, vote, and have a good night.